That is exploring ethical and values-driven consultancy. I'm delighted to have such a distinguished panel and practitioners, commissioners, and many others joining us from all over the world. My name is Paul Knipe, and I'm the Director of Consultancy and Network at INTRAC. I will be chairing this event today. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to add into the chat your name, your role, and where you are joining us from. While people are adding this, I'd like to explain some housekeeping. We are all so familiar with online events these days, but a reminder, please do keep yourself on mute to avoid any background noise, and I urge you to keep your video on as well so we can see you, which adds to the event. So before moving to the agenda, I'm handing over to my colleague, Kate Newman, who is the Chief Executive of INTRAC, for a short announcement. Thanks, Kate.
Hi everyone. Really nice to be here. Really nice to see you all. As Paul said, I'm Kate. I'm the CEO of INTRAC, and I just wanted to let you know about a campaign that we're launching today, Knowledge for All. So many of you use our open resources, maybe the M&E universe, or you come to webinars like this, or the learning papers, and we keep them free because they're part of our charitable mission. Our mission is to strengthen civil society so that organisations can do what they want to do better. And so today we want to sort of keep doing this and to grow it, but creating resources like today, or toolkits, or webinars, or updating practical papers and translating content, and offering scholarships to people from the majority world to join our training courses all take time. So we're launching a campaign called Knowledge for All, which is a simple way to donate directly to INTRAC so that we can keep these resources current, accessible, and hopefully open and expanded to all. For example, we've just added 16 M&E universe papers in French, Spanish, Bahasa, and Bahasa Indonesia to our website, and we provide scholarships for majority world practitioners to join our training. We want to keep sharing our learning openly and not behind a paywall. So if your resources have helped you or your organisation, please do consider becoming a founding donor with a one-off month or monthly gift so that we can reach more practitioners in more places. And we've put the link in the chat and we'll follow up by email. So I feel slightly awkward starting a seminar with a plug like that, but it would be really great if you can give, or if you can't give, at least share the page with a colleague who likes the M&E universe or comes to our events, and that will expand the impact too. Thanks everyone for everything you do and for helping keep knowledge for all truly for all. And I'll pass back to Paul for the main event today.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's really good to hear that. So back to the event today. So we have an exciting agenda today. Firstly, I'll briefly introduce what we mean by ethical and values-driven consultancy and why we feel it's relevant and indeed essential for the dynamic context we are in. I'll then introduce our panel, who will speak for a short time, followed by a question and answer session in plenary. Finally, I'll hand over to my colleague from the West Africa Civil Society Institute for some final reflections. So please do add questions or comments into the chat. We will collate these and share with the panel and also feed them into the outputs from this event. Just like to acknowledge before we get started all the posts in the chat. We have people here from all over the world, which is wonderful, and welcome again to this event. So why are we talking about ethical and values-driven consultancy? We're in a time of such complex, unprecedented, and interlinked challenges, exacerbated by drastic cuts to official development assistance. Calls to reimagine our sector and approach have accelerated. To rise to these challenges and to address structural inequalities, approaches to development need to evolve. Many are calling for a radical overhaul of the aid and development system. We are at a critical time. We have the opportunity to shift from approaches that are accused of being ineffective and rooted in colonial practice. Many people and organizations are working tirelessly to overcome challenges. From the uncertainty, we want to see and build on opportunities to change. At INTRAC, we have long advocated for the need for and the importance of values-driven consultancy to enable people to achieve their aims. But we also know that as the sector reforms, so too should consultancy practice. And this is where we come to ethical and values-driven consultancy. INTRAC, with our partners, colleagues, aligned and part of discussions, believe that through an ethical and values-driven lens, consultants can work alongside organizations and actors to support resilient, impactful civil society ecosystems. Yes, at INTRAC, our focus is civil society, but the principles of ethical and values-driven consultancy can just as well translate to any areas that are related to development assistance and other walks of life, ultimately contributing to futures where everyone can thrive. So what is ethical and values-driven consultancy? Firstly, it's who the consultant is and the knowledge and experience they bring. So this is about considering who is best placed to deliver the work. This means emphasizing the importance of deep contextual and cultural understanding, as well as familiarity with the nuances and sensitivities of particular cultures or scenarios. Lived experience and context-based knowledge are valued equally alongside technical skills. So we aim to prioritize investment and support for local or marginalized consultants, those who are rooted where the work is taking place. Some may not have had the exposure or support or opportunities to practice consultancy that others may have had. We also want to be clear on the added value and justification for international consultants if working in contexts where they are not already rooted. So to help with this point, we consider where we can the civil society support ecosystem relating to the assignments in question. If an ecosystem is stronger, so for example, it has a dynamic local consultancy market and support providers who are providing services that are easy to access, it's an ecosystem with skilled professionals with opportunities themselves to connect and learn among peers, we will ask, what is the added value of input from consultants from other places? It's not to say there isn't value, but this needs to be clear. Secondly, the approach to consultancy. This is about seeking an open, honest, trusting relationship with those we are working with to get to the heart of the matter. Consultants who facilitate and support the changes and development that is sought, who use approaches that respond to the distinct needs and realities of the context. This is about building ownership and not necessarily being defined by terms of reference. These qualities, or soft skills, build of years of refining INTRAC's consulting with soul approach, and I think a link to that will be added in the chat, which has been refined with partners and others all over the world for a number of years. I think it's worth looking at that to understand more what we mean by ethical and value-driven consultancy in these aspects. And thirdly, the intention of consultancy. This is about shifting power, building inclusivity, diversity, and equity. This happens both within our own practice, through the work we do and how we do it, and in wider civil society through challenging approaches that reinforce unequal power dynamics. We believe this is core to enabling sustainable, legitimate, impactful organizations and support ecosystems that are part of a vibrant civil society. So what now? This brings us back to why we are talking about ethical and values-driven consultancy. We are raising awareness, joining with like-minded practitioners and policymakers, commissioners, movements who want progress and want to seize this moment. We believe that anyone with a stake in the consultancy journey has a role to play so that consultancy can appropriately play a part in enabling shifts to address intersecting challenges and structural inequalities. It's also tied to this about delivering good quality consultancy. So within this context, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. Firstly, we have Allan Moolman, who is Director at Dala Consulting Services. He will talk about how we can see consultants as connectors and increasing impact and value in civil society support ecosystems. Secondly, Caroline Nyamu, who is a consultant, trainer, and member of the INTRAC network. She will give her perspective as a consultant on ethical and values-driven consultancy and what this means in practice. Thirdly, Ishbel McWha-Hermann, who is Director of Project Fair at the University of Edinburgh Business School, will give a deeper dive on an aspect of ethical and values-driven consultancy that is a core issue, resolving dilemmas around equal pay. And fourthly, by no means least, Carole Frampton-de Tscharner, Organizational Development Lead at PeaceNexus Foundation, will speak about the challenges and solutions for commissioning consultancy ethically. Just again, a reminder to please add questions into the chat. Now, I will hand over to Allan. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I hope everybody can hear me. So good afternoon from South Africa. My name is Allan Moolman. As Paul said, I run a small consultancy based out of Durban called Dala Consulting. And Dala is formed out of and linked to this paper, Dala is formed out of a frustration of having commissioned consultants for most of my career, but finding often that consultants see themselves as quite separate from the development ecosystem, active in it, but largely unencumbered by it. They float through, they do a lot of different things, but it was finding for me that there was a need for a consulting practice that saw itself firmly as part of the development ecosystem, and one whose lifeblood depended on being able to strengthen that system, being able to subscribe to the values, and most importantly, from my work from inside of organizations, to continue to reinforce change across the broader world. So if consultancies are not grounded in that broader ethical framework, that broader framework of wanting to actually shift the way the world operates, I think that they become less and less useful to us. So the paper is essentially about a transfer of learning and experiences through the system, which in its current design, the development sector doesn't do very well. It's plagued by issues of competition. It's plagued by shortages of resources. And so most of our efforts to actually enable a broader learning ecosystem are quite hampered by our operations in a resource scarce environment. I think this is becoming pretty acute at the moment. And so the siloing, the need to protect IP, the need to be seen as bigger and better than the rest, I think is becoming a distinctive driver of many organizations' operations at the moment. And so in this environment, I think consultants become even more important, because it's one of the few sort of parts of the system, of the few entities in the system that do have a view of the many and multiple things that are taking place across the various parts of the broader development sector. It's their insights across organizational contexts, across geographical contexts, across practices and approaches that can, I think, potentially create the sort of accelerator that will allow us to work in a new and different way. But it's important that in order to do this effectively and in order to do this properly, consultants have to operate with an ethical framework that at its base is the idea of benefit to the broader sector, not necessarily to my own consultancy or to my client only, and an ethical framework that sort of takes the enabling or accelerating role as critical in the broader change processes that we are engaged in. Consultants have a strong role to play in synthesizing these various insights that they have through their contact with the wide variety of organizations they work with, and in sense making. It's not always that people who are in the weeds can actually look up, see the broader context, and be able to make sense of it in a sort of in a deeper way. We're all plagued with the crises of delivery. We're all plagued with the need to meet the log frame, do the whole rest of the shenanigans that are demanded of us. And so often sense making, often an upward look, is not available to many organizations. In fact, it's a luxury for many. So consultants can play a very strong role in synthesis and sense making, and then making sure that their synthesis, their understandings, their practice, their insights are available to the sector to use as much as possible. I'm assuming that I'm making this input on the basis that I think people have read and engaged with the paper. So I'm focusing on the sort of higher order, what I think are the important bits of it, not necessarily the detail. The last piece that I want to focus in on is some of the cautions that emerge out of this. For most of my practice, I've been very concerned with power and how power manifests in our systems, and work with the idea that power is not only regulated externally, it's not necessarily the outsider, the viewer of the power that has to regulate. It's also the person who's inside of the system, who has to be conscious of their power and work with it in a very, very reflexive way. So the tension of the commercial imperative is quite high. We can, as consultants, continue to focus on our own livelihoods. And I'm not saying it's not important, but we have to find a balance between our need for income, our need to secure our livelihoods, with the need to make sure that the system functions effectively. For that, we have to understand that we are embedded in the system, we are of it, and can't function without it. And so it's really important that we constantly ask ourselves, in whose interest are we operating, in order to make sure that the system is maintained and that there can be growth, there can be change, and the much needed change that we need is realized. The question of homogenization, we are grounded in a world that says my ideas have to dominate, that if I have something that is good in a particular context, everybody should use it. And we have to be very, very careful of whether or not we're creating the conditions under which civil society grinds to a screeching halt, because we're all doing the same things despite the world being very different in particular contexts. And so the allure of the model and the framework and the 3 C's or the 3 P's or the 5 I's, whatever new and inventive thing that we put down as marketing material, needs to be constantly questioned. When we start selling our ideas as the panacea, the ultimate solution, I think we are in big, big trouble. So we have to watch ourselves. We have to watch our own egos, and we have to watch our own power. I think the last thing that I have to say is that in order to practice in this way, consultants have to be extremely reflexive. They have to see themselves as part of the system, be conscious of the power that they wield, and constantly mediate that power, constantly taking care not to do harm. And that's not to say that you won't do harm. Unintended consequences in this sector are rife. But when they do occur, I think it is the consultant themselves that have to step up, acknowledge failings, and make sure that there is some form of correction that takes place. We are not gods in the system. We don't know everything. And we have to be a little more humble in our approach to the work. I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allan. Some very important words there. I'll now hand over to Caroline. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline, and I'm an independent consultant based in Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm going to be sharing a bit about my own experiences in the consulting space and the intersection of ethics and values-driven consulting. So when I decided to become a consultant, one of the first things I did was tell colleagues, people I'd worked with in the formal space, other consultants that I was joining this sector. And I remember one colleague saying to me, "I hope you don't become one of those consultants." She didn't have to elaborate or explain what one of those consultants meant. We probably have encountered one of them in our lifetime. People who overpromise but underdeliver, or people who sign contracts and they get paid the down payment and then they go missing in action, or rather missing in inaction. And as I was thinking about this when I started my journey and wondering how, I guess, to guard against becoming one of those consultants, I've often been reminded, and especially for the clients that we work with, that at their best, they're trying to solve some of the most complex challenges that are facing us in our time. They work with some of the most disenfranchised populations and individuals, people affected by conflict, by effects of climate change, human rights violations. These are the people that they are serving or trying to serve and to bring a change in their lives. And when they approach us as consultants to bring our expertise, they're doing that in the service of the work that they're doing. So we're part of an ecosystem. We're part of something bigger when we bring our expertise, when we bring our skills and our knowledge into this space. And if I can remember that my expertise is in the service of these, not just clients, but these communities to bring about the kind of transformation they want, perhaps that can bring me a little bit closer to making a positive contribution and being less of one of those consultants. I think the other thing that in my journey as a consultant, I have learned is the kind of relationships that we build with clients. Now, clients want a service. They'll give you the terms of reference, and they want you to deliver a particular service, whether it's a research and evaluation. And it's very easy to see the terms of reference just as that. This is what they want, and you deliver on the terms of reference. But again, early on in my consulting, I learned the hard way the need to have a bit more of a conversation. So there can be something of a meeting of minds, or certainly a coming closer of minds. I got a job, which I did according to the terms of reference. But when we got to the end and I delivered, the client said, you haven't delivered what we wanted. But then when we had a conversation, it became apparent that what they really wanted is not what the terms of reference had said. And I remember thinking about that, and on reflection, I realized now I should have had more of a conversation. And it's taken me to that place where anytime I'm about to engage with a client, we have a conversation on the terms of reference, even if they seem very clear. And what I've learned is that sometimes clients overwhelmed with the work that they're doing, and so what they think is in the terms of reference might be different from what they really want. And I think having those conversations has helped in terms of deciding, is this the kind of work that I want to do or I have the ability to do? Earlier this year, we had a conversation with a client on their terms of reference, and it was very clear that there were gaping holes in the terms of reference. And so working and talking together, I realized that there was a capacity need with this particular client. And so I offered to help them strengthen their terms of reference, whether they give me the job or they didn't. And I think thinking about values and ethical consulting, being able to bring our expertise, not just in the work that the client wants us to do, but also in helping to enhance capacities, especially for some of the organizations that we work with who are rural-based, community-based, and don't have maybe the technical jargon that we might be accustomed to. So seeing consulting not as a transaction, but as a transformational process. And I think my last point is about the relationships, again, that we have with our clients. Now, we have opportunities as consultants to work for big clients, and we have also opportunity to work for smaller organizations that pay modest pays. And I guess one can't dictate who you work with because, again, as Allan mentioned, this is our livelihood. We need to pay our bills. But working with some of these, especially smaller organizations, how do you treat them? Because they're paying you a smaller fee, does that mean that you treat them with less deference than your big clients? And also, do they bring less to the table because they're smaller clients? And as George Orwell says, some clients are more, what is it? All clients are equal, but some clients are more equal than others. Is that how we approach our relationships with our clients? And so I think for me is to remember that, again, if we go back to where I started, that they're serving some of the most disenfranchised and needy communities, then there is an imperative for us to bring humility in the relationships that we have with our clients, to bring respect and to recognize the wisdom, the knowledge, the expertise they bring. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here, and to treat them with the same deference that we would treat or that we give to our bigger clients. Remembering that the relationship isn't just one of consultant and client, but there is something bigger that we are contributing to. So I'd like to stop there and say thank you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. A nice point about transaction, but a transformation. That's nicely worded, I think. And I can see that we're getting some points now in the chat as well, and that's sort of resonated with people. Andy's just put a point in there as well. Do put questions into the chat if they're coming to you. So I'll hand over now to Ishbel.
Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to meet you all. My name is Ishbel McWha-Hermann, and I am a professor of work and organisational psychology at the University of Edinburgh Business School. I'm also the director of Project FAIR, and what I want to do today is really talk you through a little bit of our journey with Project FAIR. We look at the issue of fair pay in the INGO sector in particular, and we operate a network of international NGOs, specifically reward managers and HR managers who are really keen to examine pay in the sector and to try and identify as ways that we can create fairer pay systems within the sector. So what I wanted to do today is to start with a story. It's a story about my own life. So 20 years ago, I made a decision to move from my home in New Zealand to Cambodia. I wanted to travel, but mostly I wanted to be completely immersed in another culture. I'm sure this sounds familiar to many of you. I had studied work psychology. I'd learned a lot about organizations and organizational development. And so I really wanted to learn and to see about how organizations operate in different countries. What I experienced when I arrived in Cambodia and across the next year that I lived there was completely unexpected. I was very confronted by the kind of dual economy that I was met with. I was shocked at these kind of, juice bars, spa resorts, restaurants that were catering for expatriates, but really closed to most, if not all, of the local community. And that was not at all what I expected to find, perhaps naive back then as I was. But equally and interestingly, as an international person, the first question that I was often asked by other international colleagues was, "Are you an expat?" So they were trying to suss out my kind of positioning within society. Are you an expat? Well, I was a volunteer. I was being paid a local salary actually as a volunteer. So not really a volunteer at all. But somehow this kind of positioned me as a less than an expat. Earning less made me somehow worth less. And that was a very interesting kind of a dynamic. As a work psychologist, I found this kind of social positioning that a job could have something really, really fascinating and also quite worrying, right? So in the kind of a sector where our goal is to build communities, to support people in different contexts, the idea that these jobs were positioning people in different ways, I found quite worrying. I really enjoyed the work. I had great colleagues. We chatted, we laughed. I learned a lot. I felt I could contribute a little bit as well. But what I really found interesting was observing how my colleagues interacted with other international people. So often they said to me they were happier working with me as a volunteer than they were with expatriates and consultants, international consultants. They were glad to teach me about the local context and the work that they were doing. They regularly mentioned that a big barrier to them was the feelings that they had about the high salaries that many international people received, and how this made them feel less inclined to go out of their way to help them. So pay really mattered in a social sense for the way the social network was constructed within the location, but also for the way the organization itself operated. So this experience impacted me really, really profoundly, and so much so that I decided to make it the basis of my PhD research. So in the late 2000s, I spent 4 years studying specifically this kind of phenomenon, so pay and job categorization within international NGOs. And I've been studying it ever since, basically. So what I found is really interesting. I found a clear hierarchy of status and power between international and national staff, which, I think we're all well aware of that and the kind of history of why that exists. I also found a very clear hierarchy around expats, consultants, and volunteers. And of course, the hierarchy itself maps directly onto pay. So there's something in there that we need to be exploring and examining. Fair pay, it's not just about how people feel, although that is very, very important. It's also really important to recognize that pay differences can and do get in the way of the work that's being done. When people don't feel good, they don't tend to work as well as they could and as they can. They're less inclined to help their colleagues, they're less motivated in general in the workplace. It's not good for anybody. Of course, pay is also very symbolic. It can signal value to the organization. It can signal your value outside your organization as well. And I think sometimes in the quest to get the very best person for the job, this aspect of the kind of symbolic nature of pay can get lost, can get forgotten. So helping organizations to navigate this is what we do at Project FAIR. We've established a set of principles and standards of fair reward. We've co-created this with our partners. We also have a lot of research-based resources which help organizations to create fairer pay systems. We're part of the University of Edinburgh, as I mentioned, and so a really important part of our identity is that independent academic research aspect of what we do. A lot of what we do is focusing on how to structure pay and the different ways that an organization might choose to structure pay. So what kind of strategic decisions go into the way that you pay people. And also another fundamental aspect is thinking about what does fairness mean to different people and in different cultural and geographic contexts. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So what I wanted to really focus on here is when we think about ethical and values-driven consultancy, there are two main areas that I think we need to be thinking about. The first is, how do we pay our consultants? Maybe the most obvious one. And then the second piece is around, as a consultant, how do you advise organizations on pay? How do you make sure that your organization, that the advice you're giving to the organizations and to your clients is the most up to date in terms of what fair pay is? And we can help with that. We have a lot of resources that can help with that. Now, the first thing to be aware of is, with what I've mentioned already, is that pay differences within teams have real interpersonal implications. Our data shows this, and understanding how this plays out is really important for the effectiveness of collaboration and also of the projects themselves, so how they're being delivered. Pay always triggers strong feelings. It's a very emotive topic, and it's something that you need to really think through carefully and strategically. The second point I want to make is that we are learning more and more about how to structure pay so that it feels fairer for everybody. The principles and standards are really important here. Now, as I said, we co-developed these with a set of 25 international NGOs as a kind of a goal for the sector to move towards in terms of what does fair pay look like. And it's things like that we have 6 principles, and those are things like ethical reward, transparency, equity, sustainability, compliance, and risk. There is no one-stop shop when it comes to what fair pay looks like in an organization, but we can have these kind of principles to build on that will help to structure pay in fairer ways. Building on this, and really importantly, these decisions about how to structure pay need to be participatory. So they need to reflect the philosophy and values of the whole organization, not just one particular group. So oftentimes, the people who are setting the policies are located in one particular part of the organization, perhaps in the headquarters office. If you're a consultant, making sure that you're including the voices of people in all of your different locations of that organization. We know that there are different perspectives and different preferences for how pay is structured according to different cultures and different geographic locations. Some people prefer equity, some are more based around equality, others are more focused on need. I'm very happy to elaborate on that later if you would like, but what's important is that we have to question which approach we're prioritizing and who is making that choice.
Just 1 minute left, Ishbel. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the third point is that it's crucial that consultants appreciate the importance of pay systems and how they link in with DEI initiatives. I always say pay is the most visible manifestation of inequality in an organization, but everything has to be addressed in tandem. And it very much aligns with shifting the power initiatives and decolonial approaches as well. We must think of those all together. So my final couple of points are to be intentional about using consultants and why you might use international consultants. So always be critical about this and ask why. Pay the job, not the person. So make sure you're paying the role itself and not the person that you're putting into that role. You understand the data that exists. So if you're a consultant and you're helping organizations to come up with a new pay system or to think about their pay system, remember that the benchmarking data is simply a reflection of the status quo. So if there are inequalities baked into that status quo, they're going to be replicated through the data. So always question that. Yeah, so really I'm going to leave it at that, Paul, I think. But thank you very much, everybody, to inviting me today.
Thanks, Ishbel. Some really, really helpful and important points there, which I think can be quite a sensitive topic, and I think that was really helpful. And just to highlight, if you didn't see that in the chat, there is a link to Project FAIR. I think those resources will be very, very helpful for all of us. Another reminder, there's a couple of questions coming in. Do please continue to add questions into the chat. And now I'll hand over to Carole from PeaceNexus.
Great, thank you. So just to give a little bit of context, we are a small Swiss foundation. We committed to peace building, and we believe to invest in peace, you have to invest in the peace builders. So we're quite unique in supporting only organizational change and peer learning processes. We've long believed that peaceful solutions are to be found by those most affected by the conflict. So the majority of our partners are local actors. Our support is not a complement or condition to programmatic funding. It comes as a standalone, and it's completely demand-led in that we literally ask via call for proposal who needs and wants to help in strengthening the organization and adapting to their context. It's a commitment of 3 to 4 years, tailored to support for partners that are ready for transformation. And it may sound a bit too good to be true, but just to say our grants are small. We only have a few partners and the number of eligibility factors. But Anyway, so that's the context. But in the support we provide, we are highly dependent on the consultants. And so we've put a lot of thought on how to set up our partnership for success, and we take different roles for this. First, we spend weeks, sometimes months, working directly with our partners as a facilitator. The application documents of our calls are short because they're often written by one or a few people. And we want to give space for the organization as a whole to collectively review their context and how they engage with it, how they're organized, what's working, not working, also where their practices are aligned with their values and where there's a discrepancy. So the aim is greater impact, but also greater coherence. The result of this consultation is what we call the change roadmap, and developed in a participatory manner with a cross-organizational team, input from many different stakeholders. And that sets a vision for a different future for the organization and very concretely defined change objectives. So then from this first facilitator role, in the consultation, the roadmap development, we become matchmaker to find the right consultants. By this point, the partner knows exactly what they need in terms of skills, profile. So hopefully there's no gaping holes. Sometimes they need someone to accompany the whole process. Other times a meal specialist, an expert. We help them develop the terms of references, and then we circulate them. We've very much believe that hiring local facilitators is the most often the best course of action. Our grants don't allow for big, fancy international ones anyway, and we've built a database of consultants we trust, and I can say a little bit more about that later. But there's usually, however, an open process, and we provide support in running it in a transparent manner so that the partner can identify the best match. And again, for the team that works on it, it's also a unifying moment to choose that consultant. We do advise on contracting, so they're clear agreements, realistic timelines, and again, a good frame. But it's our partner that make the final choice, sometimes not what we would choose, and it's the partner that contracts. Once that is done, our role changes again to being what we call the process guardian. We stay involved, and we use the roadmap that's been developed as a shared reference to keep everyone on track. We host regular check-ins to ensure that we're making progress towards the change objectives. We help our partners remain accountable to their own commitments, which is not easy when there are many other priorities, and to get the most out of the consultancy mandate. So it's a triangular model, and we don't define it too much because it looks very different for every partnership. Sometimes we work very closely with the partner in ensuring they get the best value for the investment, in helping adapt the roadmap as they go. Sometimes we spend a lot of time strategizing with the consultant on how to best navigate the internal dynamics of the organization. Having done the original assessment means we have quite a unique insight into what's going on. But of course, there are also risks and downsides to this model. It's transaction heavy. The three-way relationship has to be managed very clearly so you don't end up with role confusion. And it can be quite difficult for a consultant to come in as the newbie when we've already been at it for a while and have built strong trust and understanding with our partner. At a peer learning event, a consultant told me, "You fall in love with your partner, but not with us." And it's true, our first loyalty is with our partner, but we've taken different steps to improve the model and ensure it really is a win-win-win. So for instance, in our work in West Africa, we hosted a few years ago, we did a search for local consultants that really were working in a way that's aligned with ours, value-driven rather than more compliance driven. And then we've been growing and cultivating that community of consultants through peer learning events, having more experienced consultants, mentor younger ones, sharing learning, etc. In the Western Balkans, we've taken a different approach where we've built a pool of pre-selected consultants that we have tested to ensure they meet a certain standard of quality and understand our model. And so we have strong choices to propose to our partners. At the international level, we've included consultants to our partners' peer learning events so they can reflect on their work together. The consultants we work with appreciate our approach because, one, they get to work with an organization that has done their thinking and they've been themselves chosen through a careful process. So that is much appreciated. They have also a strong mandate that has been validated by the organization as a whole. Too often consultants are hired by the management team and then realize halfway through that there are dissenting voices in the team, that the direction of travel is unclear or contested. And then they have our support when they're struggling to have their message heard by their client, because at the end of the day, they're contracted by the organization, and it's quite difficult to sometimes push through on certain issues. And then finally, we find that consulting can be quite lonely, and we can be the thinking partner, and in some region really offer them a community of practice and learning opportunities. So that's kind of the model. It's obviously not necessarily a replicable model, but yeah, circling back to the question that was asked in the framing, how are you as a funder redistributing power in your commissioning process? I actually don't really like that frame. I prefer to sort of, it's not my role to be sort of redistributing power, but I think that I want to contribute in my individual partnerships and in the sector to a shift towards more mutual accountability, and I see my role as enabling that, to ensure that all parties have agency and voice, and that they have a clear shared reference, and then they have facilitated space to engage on what ends up often being very sensitive issues, so that they can learn together, problem solve, and that at the end of the day, you have the biggest impact, the biggest change for the organization. So I think I'm going to leave it here, and then just look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks very much, Carole, for those insights and some really important points that you have shared, which we can dig into. Whilst people add more into the chat, I've got a few questions, maybe just to get us going to the panel. So firstly, I want to come back to you, Allan, and we're just thinking about what consultants can do to prepare themselves for shocks in the system, such as uncertainty around funding and opportunities, to ensure that they can play that essential role within the ecosystem in terms of connections. I think that's so relevant to today with the uncertainties that we have. If you'd like to get us started with that, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm not sure you can prepare for shocks to the system, because at the moment they are so unexpected and quite devastating for some of the organizations that we work with, and as a consequence can be devastating for the broader ecosystem. I think the sort of the resilience, and I don't really like the word, but I'm going to use it because people like it. The resilience of the ecosystem comes from consistent practice. Right? I think it comes from being able to set up a set of relationships that have high reliability, so people know what they can come to you for, they know how you work, and they have a relationship with you that goes beyond the sort of contractual. And so I suppose it's the stuff about embeddedness and reflexivity again for me, is that the resilience of the system is dependent on strong relationships of trust that exist between all parts of the system, be that the donor, the consultant, the organization receiving the money, increasingly movements. So yes, I don't think there's anything preparatory that can be done other than to build, I think, what you guys are advocating for, an ethical practice that is consistent and reliable. And in so doing, creating some of the infrastructure that might survive a shock. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Allan. Another theme that I think has been coming through strongly in all of your speeches that we've heard is around power and positionality. I think that is something that is so relevant in how we think about and how we work with what we're calling ethical and values-driven consultancy. So I think it'd be good to explore that a little bit more. And maybe just going to you first, Caroline. So in terms of we are consultants, you are a consultant. We're aware that we bring power dimensions. How can we use our power and position to leverage positive change in the sector?
Thanks, Paul. And I think you mentioned it as you were explaining. I think firstly is to acknowledge that we don't come in as neutral actors. You're always bringing some kind of power, whether it's the expertise you've built over the years, whether it's relationships you've built with other clients that enable you entry into spaces that your clients might not necessarily or readily access. So recognizing and acknowledging that that exists. And power is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we use it. And off the top of my head, I think two things come to mind is as I am interacting with my clients and the invitation that has been given to me to bring, whatever expertise. And since I'm in the door, is to use that power to have conversations with clients to, possibly challenge some practices that are not necessarily in the best interest of whether it's the organization or the community. But I also find, again, because of the access that I have as a consultant, to use that access to advocate, especially for the, say, smaller, more rural, community-based organizations. So recently I did a job, and the client that I was doing the job for, once we'd finished the work, they said, "Oh, we're not going to do this," which I thought was in really poor taste, because it kind of was it was a very extractive approach to the way that they were working. And I said, I think this will not fly with with the organizations that you actually want to work with. There has to be some openness and transparency, and it's openness and transparency will come from you being open about what you have learned from extracting from them. So using that to advocate for sometimes organizations that feel that they cannot speak to power. And that can also play even with governments, because we do work with governments in my context. So using the power that I have to advocate on their behalf, but also to come with humility and always with the perspective that my client knows better. I don't know better. They've lived in their context somehow. I mean, they've done brilliant work against massive odds. So they have got loads of knowledge, loads of skills, loads of experience. So if my consulting work can help to unlock that, bring it to the fore, and showcase it so that they can, whether it's attract more funding, build more partnerships, then, I'll hopefully have used my power for good. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Caroline. And I saw various thumbs coming up during your answer there. So obviously well received by the participants. Does anyone else from the panel want to respond in any way to that question around power? Because I think it is so relevant. Was there any other thoughts about how we can use our power to leverage this positive change?
I wouldn't mind saying something, Paul, if that's okay. Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to put the hand up, but I don't quite see where the button is. Sorry about that. I would say, just to kind of echo and also to build on what Caroline mentioned, I think consultants have such an important role as change makers. And I think a lot of that comes down to the independence and the ability to be objective. And that's something through my research that I've really felt as well, as this ability to kind of be separate from but part of the sector and the organizations that we work with. And I think it's a similar kind of feeling for a consultant. And as you say, Caroline, it's about how you use that, how you engage with that. But that ability to be objective is something that cannot be underestimated. It's really, really important and really powerful. And so to be kind of knowledgeable yourself, and I always bring it back to fair pay because that's what I know most about. But if you're aware of all of the kind of strands and all of the nuances around pay, it's not a one-stop shop. It is something that you have to go right back to basics and understand the organization's values, the strategy. Why are they thinking about pay in certain ways? How are they using the information? How are they using a participatory approach, which we argue is absolutely fundamental? All of those things help you to objectively help them to create a system that is fairer overall. So that piece around objectivity and independence, I just really wanted to emphasize. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ishbel. Carole, did you want to come in? You've come off microphone.
Well, I mean, I don't particularly like the idea of me redistributing power, but I think it's the idea of, as Caroline said, how do you use your own power well to sort of level the playing field? How do you sort of accompany the process, being aware also that the different parties don't necessarily speak the same language, and so that everybody's kind of unpacked what is it that they're hearing from one another, and then really also agreeing how they're going to work together, how they're going to be accountable to one another. So setting up the conversation well and accompanying it, we've always, having it at heart to make it work for everyone. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Carole. And just maybe coming back onto that point, Carole, so as a commissioner, yeah, what will be one sort of key message that you would sort of say to other commissioners of consultancy in that regard?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to talk to them because we've created a community of practice for foundations, philanthropic actors that invest in organizational development, and trying to have these conversations to say, do not just delegate and leave your consultants alone and leave your partners alone. Both need support. Both need a sort of external facilitator, not necessarily as involved as we are, but someone that can really help this. As Caroline said, it's absolutely fundamental to have that conversation up front. And actually, the commissioner is well positioned to host that conversation, and to pass on messages that are sometimes not easy to pass on. So, yeah, we're very actively trying to have more awareness and more skills in this accompaniment role.
Thanks, Carole. That's very helpful insights. So yeah, we are having a few questions coming in from the chat, so I will pass this on. Just to say, if it wasn't clear earlier on, we intend to run for another 15 minutes, so we'll have 10 more minutes of questions or so, and then I'll hand over to WACSI. So one of the questions that's come in, there has been some really interesting insights on the consultant-client relationship, but typically a commissioned piece of work will impact other stakeholders, often those with less agency. Can speakers talk about any good examples of good practice in the role consultants can or should play in ensuring those impacted by the work are involved in its formulation and conduct? So maybe, Caroline, putting you on the spot, would you, as a consultant in this panel, like to go first with that question?
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for putting me on the spotlight. So yeah, I guess, and I'm just trying to think of experiences that I've had, and I think I'll go back to that whole issue around the conversations that you as a consultant have around the terms of reference and what it is that the client wants. I was asked to do some work around supporting this particular client to develop as a citizen engagement framework for an environmental project. And I remember thinking when I read the terms of reference, there was just one line in the terms of reference and asking, what does the community think about? Like, what are the needs? Where is their voice in all of this? Is this something that the client is wanting to tick the box on, or is this coming from the community? Now, unfortunately, we were not able to have a conversation. And personally, and you know, I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but I've found that if I am unable to maybe explore in a way that can help to guide the consultancy relationship that we will have, it's better not to start, because we're going to have problems. And I think that's a specific example of power and how we're using power. Again, I didn't have all the full details, or I didn't have all the details, but it felt like this was a situation where the client wanted a certain box ticked, and it looked nice to have that line in the terms of reference. So always kind of going back to, again, those who you say that you're working on their behalf, those whose voice you say you are seeking to represent, what do they actually have to say? And where is their voice coming through in this piece of work? And to me, it doesn't matter how administrative the consultancy is. What is the voice of those that you seek to represent? What is that voice saying? And how is that shaping the kind of, whether it's terms of reference or the kind of the initiative, and therefore the kind of relationship that you have with the consultant? Yeah. And I don't know whether that necessarily answers the question.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Initial thought.
Thank you, Caroline. Very helpful. I can see, Carole, you have your hand up, so please do come in.
Just sharing a little trick, something that I think works very well is a drawing. And when you ask people to map out your organization, your project, and the different stakeholders, and have different people map it out and compare those maps, that's when you can, in a way that's non-threatening, start questioning how the different parts of the system are going to work together, report to one another, and are accountable to each other, and maybe who's missing from the diagram. So it's a very simple thing, but it works better than any kind of speech. I mean, obviously, you want to include those issues and sort of, again, mutual up and down accountability in the terms of references, but sometimes, simpler is better.
That's very nice to think about that in terms of a picture. It's a nice way to visualize it. Thanks, Carole. Allan, over to you.
So I think I'll start with the concern. Consultants have to be very cautious about overreach. So in this conversation around working, again, more words, right? If you're working one step removed from implementation as a consultant, if your work is not directly engaged with that, you have to be very, very careful of overreach into the space where maybe there's other processes going on that have involved voice that led to the creation of the terms of reference. Maybe there are parallel processes going on that involve consultation that is bringing those voices into the structure and form of the consultancy, right? So I think that's the first bit. The second bit for me is all of these relationships, even at the point of contracting, start with a conversation around interpretation and your needs. So to sit down with your client to say, okay, what is it that you want? Inevitably, terms of reference are designed acontextually, and so they need a lot of grounding. They need a space, and we would normally budget 2 to 5 days for conversations with our client to understand what their needs are, to interrogate the frameworks. And if, for instance, in the framing of the work, there is a missing voice, we would encourage them to make sure that those voices are included. So I think that it's that piece, it's the formation of the relationship that is really, really critical. And it's in that moment that when you define what it is, the expectations that the client has and the consultant has for the work, that you also sometimes have to make decisions to withdraw. It shouldn't be about the money. If there's a particular approach or a way of working that you're uncomfortable with, and you proceed with that relationship, you cannot arrive at the end and say, I'm sorry, I didn't like the work, or the client is horrible. It's at that moment that you actually consolidate a relationship with honesty. Mm. The third part of it is, as you go through the exercise of consultation, if your consultancy does involve consultation and new information emerges, you have an obligation to put that information in front of the consultant, making sure that it's done confidentially and protects respondents if necessary, and to say, this piece of work may not be relevant anymore, or this piece of work is operating in a way that doesn't actually look after your beneficiaries' needs or whoever your secondary audiences are. And I think it's in that moment that you have to, again, bring the sort of ethical framework in and say, I have an obligation to make sure that this consultancy has the best possible outcomes. So that relationship that exists between the client and the consultant and third parties involved in the process is really, really important. I liked Carole's earlier input when she said, well, the partners we're working with choose the consultants, not always the ones that we would agree with. I think that is critical, that we operate in relationships of trust, and that it may go wrong, but you can only correct when it goes wrong. Preemptively blocking things, preemptively making decisions about what we do, how we do it, can lead to problems. So back to my original point, my caution is overreach, thoughtfulness, and continuous engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Allan. That's very helpful feedback. I think, unfortunately, we have reached the end of the time we have for questions, but this is obviously a really, really interesting discussion that I really hope will continue beyond this event. So just finally, I'd like to hand over to Jimm Chick Fomunjong, who is Head of Knowledge Management Unit at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, who's going to give us some reflections, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much, Paul, and all the wonderful speakers. It's really been a very enlightening perspective, and coming from an institution in the region, West Africa, that works very closely with consultants. We work with them as associates. This has really been very, very key. And of course, consultants are indispensable actors in the civil society ecosystem at large, across board, be it in Ghana or in West Africa. We do rely on these wonderful actors that operate within the space. And this session, of course, highlights the importance of grounding their work, our work, for those of us who are consultants in this session, on ethical and values-driven principles, values-driven approaches. And of course, this session has equally highlighted some of the key perspectives that need to be taken, on board. It's really been, I am a Cameroonian, and, in Cameroon, we use both the English and French languages. And of course, when something is quite delicious, we call it in French, la crème de la crème. And this session has really been a very spicy, delicious melange of ideas that I will just highlight a few of what we can, pin on as we advance our work of collaborating with consultants or advance our work as consultants within the space. Of course, it is important to recognize that we wield a certain amount of power. And Allan highlighted that it's important for us to watch our ego and the power we bring in the space, be it in our collaborations with the hiring institutions or organizations, even in the global south. It's important to recognize that. And so as consultants, we need to really be very reflective and be conscious of this power and how that power affects the dynamics within the spaces we operate within. And what caught my attention, Allan, I doff my hat for you when you said we need to be humble in our approach to every work that we do. Humility, for me as a person, is the greatest ingredient to learning and succeeding. And of course, coming into any relationship with that primary value of humility helps the consultant to appreciate that I can add value to myself by learning from this process, and in that way, adding value to the actor or actors I will be working with. And Caroline just, made it a heyday for me when she said, we should see consulting not as a transaction, but as a transformational process. In other words, what is that common goal we seek to achieve? Not the money we want to make, but that common goal. And how can I, as a consultant, put on that hat, that lens that will see me as an agent towards the transformation we all need? I think having that as one of those soft tools in our toolboxes will really help us to make a significant milestone. And, Ishbel, really spiced this, our sauce, even better when she said, pay for the job, not the person. So if you're taking on board an OD consultant, a researcher, pay Jimm Chick for the work he will be doing, not because he is a Cameroonian coming to do this work with me. Does that make some sense, somebody? Of course, it is important to take that on board. And of course, Caroline really highlighted the importance of mutual accountability, the need to develop a shared roadmap. And I think Carole gave how PeaceNexus works hard to define that collective tripartite roadmap for all actors. How can we embed this way of working in our practice to ensure that collectively we can reach out for transformation that goes beyond our logos, that goes beyond the money we will be making? I have just 5 minutes, and I hope I will be able to wrap up within this time. And to wrap up, I will bring back Caroline's opening question, the very open-ended question that she faced or encountered in her early days in consulting. When she was asked, I hope you don't become one of those consultants. However you interpret that question depends on you. But after participating in this session, I hope we will not remain or become or sustain those unwanted practices of those consultants we've seen in the space. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And thank you very much, INTRAC, for bringing this, session in place. And I hope that in our work, we are going to cross paths, not only as transacting agents, but as actors of transformation, because to shift power, to decolonize our practice, we need to collaborate in ways that will lead to transformation and not ways that will enforce transactional practice. Thank you very much, Paul.
Jim, thank you as always. Just by going on the amount of hands clapping and hearts that have been coming up on the screen there, we're uplifted. This has been an uplifting session, and I feel that your wrap-up has been particularly inspiring and uplifting, and it speaks to everything that's been said today. So thank you everyone for for joining us. And we look forward to continue connecting with you all over the world as we continue on this journey. Do keep a lookout for the resources that will follow, that we'll publish on the website, and another shout out for the Knowledge for All campaign. But thank you so much and have a good rest of your day. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.